Hey, what's happening? Happy Friday to everybody. It's Daryl here. It's bright and freaking early, man. It's 3 a.m. here in Connecticut on the East Coast. Okay, I hope you watched yesterday's short video. It's my spoken word video. It's a true story. I usually goof around. I'm serious about what I say, but I goof around in these spoken word. It's kind of like a spoof on the 1960s beatnik poetry slams down in the basements they used to have. So I kind of goof on that. And but what I say is true, is my true feelings. Yesterday I talked about Social Security and Medicaid and reduced lunches and free lunches and stuff like that at schools. And it literally saved my family's life. And I want to just tell you guys, try to do this really quick and give you a picture of what happened. This is back in 1975. My father was a hardworking park ranger, state park ranger here in Connecticut. He got the job after working for the state, working in the park for the Environmental Protection Agency, and he got the job. And we actually moved into the house that went along with the job in the state park. It was like a big log cabin, and we worked. My backyard was the whole state park, Black Rock State Park in Connecticut. It was a dream job for my father, you know. And right around that time, my little sister came. You know, so my family was, I remember I was only 9 years old in 1975, but my father was as happy as he could be. Yeah, he had this dream job that he had worked. He was about 32 at this time, and you know, since he had started working, he worked for state parks and the Environmental Protection Agency, and this was his dream job. You know, so he was happy as could be. And my mother was a stay-at-home housewife, and me, 9 years old, and my little sister, 3 years old. You know, life was perfect until I remember one morning I saw my father looking at the clock on the wall in the next room, and he was covering one eye, and then he covered the other eye. And I thought this was a game, so I stood in front of him, and you know, I was like, "What's the game?" You know, I was 8 or 9 years old, and I didn't realize at the time, but he was getting double vision, and I didn't know that. And he had a tumor in the back of his head, terminal malignant brain cancer. Within 5 months, he was dead. It was some of the worst months. I would never wish this on any 9-year-old. I remember hearing the doctors and people talking and calling my father a vegetable. To this day, I will strangle anybody if I hear them say the word vegetable describing another human being. I remember hearing my mother and the doctors and my family members whispering. You know, 9-year-olds, when you're a kid, you hear a lot of stuff that you're not supposed to hear. And I remember hearing my mom and family members saying how his sick days were going to run out, and my mother didn't know what to do, and all this other, you know, what are we going to do? And it was obvious he was dying. At the end, after those few months, he didn't even recognize who I was anymore. His head was all bald, and he had scars where they cut into his head, and crayon marks where the chemo was, and yeah, it was bad. When he died, I cried, but he was already gone to me. Now the thing is, the house came with the job, you know. So the first, even at 9 years old, I started to wonder, well, what's going to become of us? You know, we went to no income. My father actually worked 2 jobs. He actually worked at night also with the state park, this great state park job. He worked a second night job on top of that at a local factory just because he loved working and making money. And all this income was lost. You know, even at 9 years old, I didn't know what was going to become of us. You know, and I even realized, you know, this house where we lived came with the job, meaning that we no longer, since my father no longer had the job, we no longer had a house. I no longer had a father. You know, even at 9 years old, I was terrified. I remember wanting to order handcuffs in a novelty magazine because I wanted to handcuff myself to the radiator, you know, in case they came to take us out of the house, to evict us. I was going to handcuff them. You know, these are the things that went through my 9-year-old mind. They let us stay there for about 3 or 4 years until I remember the day that the state people came over, and my mother sat down at the kitchen table with them and told her she's evicted. You know, they didn't want to evict the widow and their two kids, but it came with, you know, the new state park ranger would have to get the house. My mother went back to school for nurse's aide, for nursing. She eventually settled on, she got a job with the post office, and she kept that for her whole life, the whole rest of her life. She actually retired from the post office. She loved the job. So things did improve. Actually, here's a pleasant part to that story. My mother met another mail carrier at the job in the post office, and she ended up marrying him. And right now, he is my stepfather. So my two parents are retired postal workers. Back to the story, though. I remember my mother being worried. I remember every time we went shopping, she had to add up every cent. I remember wanting to get something that was like $2, and she couldn't get she couldn't get this or couldn't get that. Money was tight. But like I said, she went back to work, she went back to school, and if it wasn't for Social Security, and telling you the truth, I was so young, I don't know how Medicaid played into it back then, but I'm sure it did. I do remember reduced lunches, because honestly, at that age, I was ashamed. For the longest time, I had been going to school, through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. And I had seen other kids, the poor kids, the kids that had the dirty sneakers and the holes in their shoes and the pants and everything like that, giving their little voucher or getting a pass when they went up to get their lunch. They didn't have to pay, or they got a reduced lunch. They had a little ticket for reduced lunch. And nobody said anything. Nobody made fun of them, but, they were kind of ostracized because they were the poor kids. And I became one of those poor kids, in the blink of an eye, in 1 year, in less than a year, in 6 months, we went from being the ideal, perfect, 1970s family. My father had his dream job. My mother, a stay-home mom, a great home, a great house, great job, a healthy 9-year-old son, a new 3-year-old, my little sister, 3 years old. And it went to hell in 6 months. That's what I said in yesterday's video. Don't be all for canceling Medicare and free lunches and stuff like that just because you don't need that right now. Because believe me, life has a way of screwing your plans, and if it doesn't happen to you, it could happen to your kids, your grandkids, other people you love. And it shouldn't take that to make you realize that this is important. One other thing. So I remember, like I said, I was young at the time, and I really don't know the numbers and specifics, but I know Medicare, Social Security, and then the lunches and all that stuff is what kept our heads above water. My mother actually bought our own home when I was 14 years old. This was about 5 years after my father had passed away. She went back to work, back to school, and she eventually was able to get a mortgage and buy us a home. So we clawed our way back up into lower middle class or middle class society. We clawed our way back in. But if it wasn't for Social Security, Medicare, and the lunch programs and all that stuff, we would have ended up on the street. God knows where I'd be now, where my sister or my mom or any of us would be now. I remember the Social Security program because my father had passed away. I had money in the bank. It was like just a couple $1,000s, I think. It was a couple $1,000s that my mother had managed to save from Social Security money and put in my bank account. And I wanted to go to university. I was dying to go. I was one of those people that wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to university. I had the good grades, but I couldn't afford it. I was right in that gray area where I really couldn't qualify for grants or anything like that. My grades were good, but not fantastic. And I fell into this gray area where I just really couldn't get into the colleges and universities I wanted to go to for architecture. So with that money that I had gotten from Social Security, I ended up going to technical school, buying tuition to go to technical school. And it was expensive. It was a really good school called Porter and Chester Institute in Connecticut. And I went there at 18 years old, right after I graduated high school, for 18 straight months of hardcore training, where I actually dressed and worked like it was an office, and they trained us for architectural and civil drafting. I got hired right out the door. Out of my class, out of 30 people in my class, 6 of us ended up graduating. It was a tough school, and it's the first place I applied hired me. It was one of the more prominent architectural businesses in Connecticut. They designed state troop barracks in Connecticut. They designed town halls and stuff like that. And they hired me. I was the youngest, one of the youngest draftsmen they ever hired. The guys I was working with had graduated out of Yale, Brown, Harvard, all this. And here I am, this kid that went to a technical school, doing drafting. And I worked my way up. I worked my way into another architectural firm and worked my way up. And right around that time, I started to get involved with drugs, but that's a whole different story. So like I said, it ended up being a positive story, but without Social Security, Medicare, and the lunch program, we would have never been able to survive. Just because it's not happening to you right now, just because you're doing good and everybody in your family has jobs and you have bank accounts and everything, don't think, I don't wish bad luck on you, but don't think for 1 second that you could lose everything by this time next year, or not even. Like I said, I don't wish bad luck on anybody, but believe me, it can happen. It does happen. That's why we should not mess with any of these safety net programs like Musk and Trump and these other billionaire bastards. Have a good Friday.